Welcome to the Disciples Podcast, where we dive into how Christian faith intersects with contemporary culture. All topics are on the table as we explore modern life through a Christian lens.
We're big on community, so we're not saying that Disciple is going to be your community, but it can be a place that fosters conversations that communities should be having. And let's introduce more thoughts. Let's introduce more ways to follow Jesus.
All right, guys, welcome to the Disciples Podcast. I'm Jared, and I'm joined with my co-host Cam, and this is going to be our pilot episode. Full transparency, we've shot a few episodes. Just wanted to make sure our mics were good, the scenery was good, all that. Probably going to make some improvements over time, but just wanted to get a couple under our belt before we shoot the pilot. And what this episode's really going to be about is, one, introducing ourselves, and then two, what we want out of this, what we want this podcast to be all about, the impact we want it to have, kind of the topics we may discuss, the range of topics, I should say. And
we're setting the vision. We're talking about what disciple is, what it means to be a disciple. I mean, take us away. We'll get into it. I know you've got a vision to share.
We'll talk about maybe some background first. So our producer, Mark, and we started a company called Disciple, and our vision was, he's a missionary in Zambia, Africa. His family's been out there, I guess, forever, really. I mean, it goes back generations, and we just wanted to start a company that could support that mission, that, we, right off the bat, we're like 25% of what we make is going directly to that mission back in Africa. And we were like, hey, the thing is that starting a company is great, but we're called Disciple, so we need to be discipling. So while he's in Zambia and he's discipling out there, he's caring for people at a clinic, at a school, we want to be back here just sort of talking about anything and everything that impacts Christians.
Well, I think one of the things as an observer, as you guys started this, that was so inspiring is the idea that we're practicing the way. We're practicing the way of Jesus Christ. And with that, you start a company to support a mission field. And there's lots of ways to do that. And both of you guys are pretty enterprising young men. And you looked at this and said, okay, we want to have a clothing brand that honors God. And that's great because that's going to support missions in Africa. And, we're having great conversations in our small groups and among our friends about what's going on in culture and what we're reading in the Bible and what's going on, just what we see in our worldview. So you took this and said, look, I think there's a lot of synergy that could be had from having conversations of people that are trying to practice the way. How can we bring those conversations, bring more people in and share that vision and support kingdom work, whether it's in Zambia or whether it's in America or wherever it may be. But starting with what Mark's doing in Zambia is a great place to start, an amazing way to open the conversation of how do we walk the way with Jesus? How are we truly a disciple, not a Christian, but how are we a disciple of Jesus? Because I think that one of the things that we've talked about on our earlier podcast that the audience doesn't know about yet is that there are Christians in name only, and then there are disciples. Those are followers of Jesus that make everything in their life centered around that truth.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think for you and I, we met through our church. Yep. That's been growing, expanding. I think the average age of the congregation is like 30.
Yeah, I know. I'm still old. That's killing me. It hurts
we
a little bit on Sundays.
we have an event called Gather Round that's done like once a month at our church, and it's for the congregation, but it's for young adults, and like hundreds of people come out, and I'm like, I can't go to this anymore.
It's a really sad thing, but I'm no longer a young adult. I'm just an adult.
Right.
So yeah,
exactly.
It's done for you. Your time's gone.
Exactly. But through this church and the community focus that I think the church has, we've been able to build a relationship, and we have a whole bunch of other guys that we built relationships with, and it's given us a lot of different perspective. I mean, the people in our groups, I mean, the struggles are wide ranging. The work that Christ is doing in each one of their lives is wide ranging, and it's amazing to see, and the testimonies and everything else. And then, and this is my experience, is as I go either out of the church or meet people who are just coming into the church, they don't have that. They don't have that community. They don't have that discipleship. They don't have that accountability. And when we say accountability, we're not just talking about, hey man, like, let's try not to do that. Let's work through whatever this is. No, the accountability of, are you praying this week? Are you
not
reading
stop
your
smoking,
word?
drinking, sleeping
yeah,
around,
it's not that. Yeah, but a lot of people don't have that, and there's a real need. And we've talked about it on some of the episodes that we've already shot about male loneliness, depression, anxiety, testimonies that we've heard from guys. They're just like, man, I believe in God, but I feel like it's such a lonely walk. And I hear that and I'm like, man, that hasn't been my experience at all.
Well, I also think, there's a million podcasts now, right? One of our friends jokes, we're doing the most white male thing ever, two guys starting a podcast in this way.
Yeah.
But I think the takeaway that I see in this space is that these are conversations that need to be had, that people want to have, but they may not have a space to engage in them. And there's a great podcast on apologetics. We talked about apologetics last time. And there's great podcasts when you want to go into just hear a sermon. And at the same time, YouTube's a great place to get extra material. It's a terrible place to go to church. And a podcast is a place where I think we can kind of dip our toes into the idea of let's have the conversations that we're having about what we're learning, what's going on in our lives, our friends' lives, from that lens of being a disciple, because I think that's a space that's lacking. And we're big on community, so we're not saying that disciple is going to be your community, but it can be a place that fosters conversations that communities should be having or are having almost in an echo chamber. And let's introduce more thoughts. Let's introduce more ways to follow Jesus.
Right, exactly. And I think too, we're really going to talk about culture. We're going to take I can't tell you how many times I've watched a video on YouTube and I see a comment that's just, they're talking about something and I'm like, wow, like there's a need here. It has the most likes. Like we need to discuss this. And I think that it really defines our scope, which is our scope is pretty much, if it impacts Christians, we're going to talk about it and we're going to do our very best to look at it the way a disciple should look at it.
We are never going to run out of topics.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I don't think that we're necessarily going to be preaching a sermon. I think that if you want to go deeper into the context of Scripture, those sorts of things, obviously we'll touch on it. We'll have guests on that'll talk about it. But there's other places for that. There's Mike Winger. There's Bama. There's a lot of other places to go. I think that our scope is really on just kind of walking with our audience through these challenges that we face today.
Yeah, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a preacher. I just want to follow Jesus in a context that I can relate to and have conversations about content that I'm seeing inside and outside the church. How do I consume this and think about this and have conversations about this in a way that is honoring to the way? Right.
And another thing that I would say is we're not holding back. Like if there's somebody who's influencing a lot of people and if they were to speak in church, there's some churches that would be like, get out of here, we're not doing that. Like people are listening to these folks and they're sometimes spot on. They're sometimes not from a biblical perspective. And we're going to bring it in.
Well, we have an episode where we talk a lot about Joe Rogan or Andrew Tate. And it's the idea that sometimes these people might even have a correct diagnosis about something that's wrong in society that's impacting culture. But they don't really have the right remedy. They're not looking at this from a Christ-like lens, and that's where we can step in and say, hey, you want to know what? They're touching on something that is important to culture and is impacting Christianity and is impacting Christians. However, what they're actually prescribing as a solution isn't something that we're going to endorse biblically.
Right, exactly. And something else, I think that, and this is a question that I asked in a Bible study yesterday. I said, how do you think the outside world looks at Christianity? How do you think that somebody who's not a Christian looks at Christianity? And what they're probably going to say is, look, Jesus was great. I get it. People are trying to, do good works and be a good person, or maybe they'll say, hey, it's strict. You have to follow these rules. And it's like, no.
Yeah, it's either there's no God, your God's judgmental and evil, or how can he be all powerful if there's evil in the world, or at the same time, he's just a good teacher. Like those are some of the major camps we see people fall into, where it's like Christ is one of many ways to heaven. There is no heaven, there is no God, or I actually think your God is judgmental and or evil are the common places we see people fall that don't know Jesus.
Right. And I think we're really going to, as we discuss things, we understand, hey, look, there is an eternity mindset, right? We're not of this world, right?
And the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's now. Yeah.
It could be tomorrow, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen an hour from now. We don't. But we are here, and we are here to glorify God. And so part of that is navigating the circumstances that we're in. And obviously we're two guys, so we're going to speak a lot from the male perspective. Hopefully there'll be a female disciple podcast coming soon. But, I think, back to what I was talking about, that idea of Christianity being works-based and all those things, it's so counter to the gospel. It's not about works. The most righteous person in the world and the least righteous person in the world both need Christ. And, this is a podcast where, anybody can listen in. This is not, we're gospel focused. We're going to talk about topics. And if we talk about something and it's offensive or something like that, it's not personal against maybe your beliefs or your doctrine or anything, but we are gospel focused and we're going to stick to the word of God throughout as best we can, right? I mean, we're not theologians, but also
to go into the space of wanting to deepen our theology and ask those questions ourselves. Mm-hmm. I loved our apologetics podcast in the sense that the theme of this is, don't take the Mormon route of doubt your doubts. Let's go deeper, let's explore, let's seek. And I think that's really great about this platform so far is not this idea that we're going to shove something down your throat. If we don't know something, we don't know something. And we're going to question and seek as well and find resources and find answers, but nothing is off the table in any direction. Let's find truth.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's inevitable and this isn't a political podcast, but politics is very much part of our culture. And so, for example, politics, if we're talking about something political, look, we don't necessarily know the answers. I've gone back and forth so much between a Quaker versus abolitionist mindset. It's I don't know, right? But I'm open to talking about it, right? And I think that's kind of where we're coming from, is that we will talk about anything. If you have any questions, any topics that you want us to talk about, we're open to it all.
Yeah, send them in.
Yeah. So with that, I think we've defined our scope, which is extremely wide and broad.
I would say it's a podcast with the focus of being a disciple and follower of Jesus Christ in today's current culture and discussing things that matter inside and outside the church and how Christians should think about, have conversations, and really proceed in a way that makes Christ the focus even in today's modern culture.
Yep, that's really good. So do we want to introduce ourselves?
Please.
Well, if we want to do that, do we want to do full testimony? How do we want to go about this?
I think I would love to hear your testimony.
Okay. All right. Well,
Absolutely.
We'll start there. This will be probably the most long-winded things that we ever say, because
people are going to skip the pilot and be like, what do these guys actually talk about? I've just been listening.
Exactly. Because I feel like to do a testimony justice, you have to kind of go through it in its
Well, we have a clock,
entirety.
So it's just on you at this point.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, if I go for 10 minutes and you go for 60 seconds.
Yeah, I'll make you look bad.
Yeah. So let's shoot for 5 to 10 minutes each. How about that?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Well, for me, I did not grow up in church. Grew up in a single parent home, pretty poor. Mom's income was well below the poverty line. And so, I didn't really have masculine influences. And also, I didn't really have anything to guide me, but I knew friends who had successful parents, and I was like, look, I don't want to be a statistic. I don't want to go the route of people who are in my situation that don't have a father in their life, that, if you look at the stats, the vast majority of crime, of poverty, it stems from single parent homes. And I didn't want to go that route, but I didn't know how to necessarily navigate it. So I went your standard route, going to college, started community college, going to 4-year university, working while going, paying for the college out of pocket, got a job out of college, decent one. Eventually went into investment banking, did pretty well, had to get out, and got just a normal corporate America job. And all the while, I'd been with a female, and we ended up getting married, and things were going pretty well. We were together 11 years, and things were going good. Had kind of that, went from poverty to that upper middle class lifestyle, house, car, dogs, all that stuff, right? So things were going really well, but I was still pretty empty, right? I been to church. I was one of the Christmas and Easter Christians, and, I can just remember one night just having a week where didn't have a lot going on right after Christmas. Nothing's going on at work. And was just completely down, nothing to do. And I'm walking my dogs and I'm just like, look, I've accomplished all this stuff, but what is this? And I remember just kind of praying to God, like, God, give me purpose, And it wasn't like I had a relationship with God or anything like that. Well, turns out sometimes you should be careful with your prayers because he answered 3 days later. And my wife at the time left, just came up to me and was like, I'm leaving. And it caught me completely off guard, had no idea, right? There was nothing that I could think of at the time. I mean, obviously I wasn't perfect or anything like that. I was definitely flawed in the marriage, but, it caught me completely off guard, surprised, everything. And the next day, she's there getting all her stuff and there's no changing her mind. And, I was just, what the heck, And so I grabbed my dogs, went for a walk, had to get out of the house, and didn't get outside of eyesight of the house. And all I could see was darkness. Because it's like I built up these idols, whether it was with finance or with her or all that stuff. And I just remember crying out to God and just being like, God, if you're real, I need you right now. I need you right now. And he put this church in my head. And I'd never been to the church, didn't know the pastor, didn't know anything. He just put it in my head and got in my car and drove there. And the whole time I'm thinking I'm going crazy, right? Because I'm like, it's a Monday night, what am I doing? Gonna go pray in the parking lot, doesn't make any sense. Well, I get there and turns out that I get there at 6:55 on a Monday, and turns out that this church is the only church where I live that offers a 7 o'clock Monday night service. And so I'm like, whoa. And I go in, and the sermon's very pertinent to me. And in the trial that I was going through, and I was just like, whoa, God's real, right? But I didn't know what that meant, right? I didn't know anything about God, really. I didn't really understand the gospel, but I knew in that moment, he's real. And so over the next 5-6 months, just started really building a relationship with God and learning about God, spending a lot of time in church, a lot of time listening to Mike Winger. I think I was listening like 5 hours of Mike Winger a day. But God still had to break down my idols. And so things got pretty bad in those 5-6 months, pretty much lost everything. And I can remember at the end of it, it was about 5-6 months in, like I said, and I got a bill from an attorney. That was like one of those bills that was like, one more of these, I'm grabbing my bug out kit, my favorite gun, and I'm going to go live out in the woods. Like, that's my plan. Like, I was seriously like, that's my plan, right? And I got mad. I got mad at God, like a Job-like sort of anger towards God. And the next day, a settlement agreement came out of nowhere that was pretty good. I got confirmation on a house that was a lottery house that, like, my name got pulled, which that's a whole story in and of itself. I got my dog back that I had for 8 years. And another thing happened that I'll talk about in a second. I just happened to pray. It was kind of a flippant prayer about, hey, God, I've been getting poured into so much. I want to start serving in the church. Just put me where you want me to be. And this guy that I didn't even know texted me and was like, hey, man, 2 of our Sunday school teachers just left. I really need you to fill in the kids ministry if you'd be willing to. And of course, I'm like, I don't want to do anything with kids. But when God answers a prayer that quickly, you just kind of say yes. And so all those things happened. And that's when it really broke me, because it was like, even though I'd given up on God, God did not give up on me.
Amen.
And that's that unilateral covenant that he has with us. It's not about these worldly blessings. It was a reminder that the greatest miracle is what he did on the cross. And it hit me like to my core. And that was the moment that I actually broke. In the whole 6 months, I never broke. I never cried. It was like that determination, that will that I always had. It finally broke in that moment. And then after that, like, the restoration began. Ended up starting to go to the church that we go to. Met all my best friends, And when I got to the church, I said, hey, where do you guys need help at?
It's always going to be kids.
You know where this is going. And they said the kids ministry. So I joined the kids ministry, and I was one of 2 guys among 70 women. And it was through that kids ministry that I met my wife. And now I'm in a godly, God-focused marriage. We both seek to glorify God, and it's something that I never had before. And that prayer that I prayed 3 years ago, whatever, about giving me purpose, it's like God answered. And
has he ever?
Today.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so many things too that I just want to talk about a little bit in your story. Like, you were so loved, and this is true of all believers, but I love when I hear this story when you didn't know God at all and you're on that walk and you get prompted to pray, where he is begging you to come in and have that moment with him as such a good father. Like, when I hear that story, and it's the immediately answered prayer, and immediately, but that first time when you get prompted, he's like, come talk to me. I have things for you. And I love that, right? Like, not even getting into predestination and things of that nature, but it's like, Jared's always been mine, and I just want to talk to him, and I just want to guide him through this. Like, your world was completely crumbling, and he said that to you. And I love that about your story, in the sense that you had nowhere to go, but he put it on your heart to come and talk to him. And I love that. And to speak to your purpose, I mean, whether it's disciple, whether it's what you do at work, because I know you crush it at work, we work for the same organization, whether it's what you do in the church for the kids ministry. I mean, you started as one of 2 guys. How many guys, including myself, have you recruited to the kids ministry now?
Yeah, I'm really good at getting guys.
you've put together multiple Bible studies. Like, you are serving. And when I moved, because we're in Charlotte, when I moved to Charlotte, I was not having a good time in Charlotte. And you grabbed me and said, hey, I got a place where I could put this guy in. And it developed into our friendship, and even standing in your wedding and doing these different things in transformation. Like, when I see you, I see someone that God prompted, and you answered every single time. And that's that following the way, that disciple that so fits for you, man, in the sense that every time that God has spoken to you, you always have that, here I am, send me, and you bring that determination to it. And he knew you so well to break you perfectly, and then to bring such beauty out of ashes is something that he can only do. So I love your testimony, man. Like, he's using you exactly how you were created to be. And it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. All right, Cam.
Now I get to go.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's a totally different story, and that's the beauty of it, right? So I grew up as a kid in a Christian home. Both my parents are believers. In fact, my granddad is a Baptist minister, or was a Baptist minister. And I was the kid that ran away from home and wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't have time for church people. I really couldn't stand church people. I thought that they were incredibly judgmental and fake. I didn't enjoy the surrounding anything with it. I mean, I remember I went to church camp one time because my parents made me go. I got my tooth busted open by a girl with a puka shell necklace, if you can believe it, back in the early 2000s.
Wow.
And that was my get out of free jail card for the rest of the time to ever go to anything church related, because remember when the puka shell broke my tooth? But for me, what happened was, when I got to undergrad, sophomore year, first day of sophomore year, I get a headache. And that headache's not going to go away for 5 years. I'm driving back to university, and I get this headache, and it's not going to go. And then slowly I lose the ability to move my hands and my feet. I go down from 175, 180 pounds to 135 pounds. And I can't eat anything. I lose the ability to read. I lose basically everything. I have no stamina. I can't pay attention, eye floaters, ear ringing. At the end of it, I think I had 50-some symptoms. And I'm still in undergrad, and I'm trying to navigate a way and find a way through this. And I get misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis, and eventually, I've dropped out of university twice, I've come back, and a really good friend of mine in my fraternity says, I've got this mentor through Campus Crusade for Christ. Why don't you go talk to him? So I go and talk to him, and I create a friendship with him, but he has been a missionary in Africa, and he actually had a parasite, and for 2 years they couldn't figure it out, so he always had bad intestinal things going on. And he goes, I know you've been to the Cleveland Clinic and University of Michigan, but go see this guy. So I go and see him, and I've got a stack of paperwork that's thick as encyclopedia, and I've been all these different places, and country doctor, and he hears my symptom list and he starts to laugh. And I'm furious, Jared. Like, I'm going to deck this guy. I might be 135 pounds, but like everything I got's going into this punch. And he's laughing and he goes, I know what you have. He goes, you have Lyme disease. And I remember being completely floored by this because I had been misdiagnosed with MS. There was lesions, there was demyelination. I was told I was never going to get better, that things were only going to get worse, that it was aggressive, that my life was basically ending. And, sure enough, it's Lyme disease when we run the test properly. And that's something to talk about. If you ever have weird symptoms, get a PCR Lyme test. But went through and realized that I had this, but I was so far gone that normal take some antibiotics isn't going to work anymore. My immune system's gone, my liver's gone, my kidneys are gone. I'd been suicidal, I'd been to all these really dark places. And without really knowing, the Lord was what was getting me through. He was getting me through this entire time. And I finally do get good treatment, and it takes about 8 years for me to truly start to get well, and had a brain scan done about 3 years ago. And lo and behold, there's no demyelination, there's no lesions because I finally got proper treatment. But along the course, similar to you, of this illness, there were people and places every step of the way where the Lord grabbed me, and it was in the breaking because I didn't realize how much pride I had. I didn't realize that I wasn't the master of my own destiny. And I remember one time, I was suicidal, and I thought about it, and I said, I'm going to do carbon monoxide, and that way my mom gets an open casket funeral. I was in these really dark places, and there's always something that stopped me. And I remember one time I went to a headache clinic, and it was a guy who was the doctor that I'd played hockey with his son, and they came back and they gave me a script for, I think it was 8 pills, but they were going to change my brain chemistry, and they were antidepressants, and there were all these different painkillers. And I was going to have to be monitored for suicidal tendencies by everybody I know because these are going to change my brain chemistry, and I was going to be in the dark. And I got home from this, and I'm with my mom, and, I tell her all these things, and I'm just broken by this because I had that will where I was saying, I'm going to get through this. I'm going to figure this out. And I remember her sitting there, and she goes, Cam, I don't know the solution, but it's not this. And we prayed in that moment, and it was the first time we got peace that this was going to be okay, that he had a way forward. And then during these really dark years, he takes step after step to make the connection and the connection and the connection I need for me to get well. And it was this huge health journey of him breaking me that led me to faith and knowing that even as I'm well now, I need him in more ways than physical health. I need him in my spiritual health because my spirit was broken, and my mental health because I wasn't healthy mentally. And it was him that brought me through and knew exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it. And talking about the years the locust destroyed, I went to grad school on a full ride because I went from not being able to read to being able to do things that way because he had such provision and blessing and timing to break me, but break me gently enough. And I needed breaking, and then to repair and restore and lead me into a beautiful place. So the Lord was someone that was chasing me, who was always running and always had preconceived notions about Christians and what the church was. And he took that and broke that and then restored me ever so gently. And I'll tell you, about once a month now, I talk to someone with Lyme disease. I talk to someone that's broken, and I can come alongside them and say, you want to know what? There's hope even in illness. And even people with some illnesses that don't get better. I know people that haven't gotten better. I know people that have lost their lives, and I know people that are in the struggle of it. And to know that he is still there for them too. And even if things don't get better, there's still illness in my family, that he is still a good, loving, and perfect God who can be trusted and does bring beauty out of ashes. And that's been the testimony that he's had for me for the last, 12 years of a breaking and a restoring and never letting me go.
Yeah. And from that time of mental and physical just not being able to do anything, to the restoration that's now made you a blessing in so many guys' lives. Every time I see you, there's just new people on the pickleball court. You're now like one of the team leads in the kids ministry. You're just killing it, right? And I think that it takes that God restoration that puts us on fire for him. And I've seen it in you. And I remember at my wedding, we went around the room with all the groomsmen and said, hey, what's your one piece of marriage advice, right? And it was funny because everybody said something great, and we had pastors in the wedding, everything, right? Everybody said something great. But your thing really stuck with me more than anything. And I remember talking to my wife, Marilyn, about it afterwards, which was, hey, allow the marriage to be like something that you take and you continue to minister and use it for that sanctification, and then continue to glorify God through it. And Marilyn and I had all these conversations leading up to the wedding, like, we're going to have to step out of this and we can't do this anymore and all this other stuff, you know? And I remember that was like the most memorable thing, because it's like, wait a second, like God has blessed me, you know, been in God's favor, greatest worldly blessing I've ever received. And, you know, it's still time to serve him and glorify him. And so that was just so impactful of what you said. And I know you say that those type of things with so many guys. And so when Mark and I were talking about starting the podcast, it was like immediately I was like, I'm talking to Cam. See if he wants to do it.
Well, I'm glad it was the single guy's advice that stuck with you for marriage. But I think that is the testament too. Like, you and Marilyn do have an amazing marriage because it's Christ-centered for the kingdom. And I think one of the things that we take from Disciple, and as we've had these podcasts and we've talked about topics, is the idea that it's not about us. Like, you as an individual, as you get closer to Jesus, it's less about you. And as it's less about you, you find more joy, more fulfillment. And we talk about the restoration he did in your life and the restoration he did in my life. And it was for us because it was about other people, right? Like, my restoration was so that I could go and be a part of the kingdom. Your restoration was so you could go and be a part of the kingdom. And I think there's just such beauty in the paradox of the kingdom of God. And I just, yeah, man, I thank you for telling me that. That actually pumps me up. I appreciate that the Lord gave you a word from what I said. That's really cool, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And in all the podcasts we've shot so far, I know you have some experience in radio and stuff. I've zero experience in any of this. So, but it's just been great. And I hope that, you know, we just, you know, we get topics that impact people, that help people with, whatever they're going through, or maybe the things that the world tells them that they're like, yeah, I don't know, you know, and it's like, maybe we can provide some clarity there.
Yeah. So, welcome to Disciple Podcast. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I think that was a good pilot. We'll have a lot more to come. Like I said, we're going to hit any and every topic. There's nothing we're not going to touch on. We'll have some guests on from time to time. And with all that, I think that's a wrap. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. See you next time.